I have been many things in my life. A paramedic who lost the one patient he swore he'd never lose. A husband to a woman who left before I could tell her why I'd gone quiet. And for the last 6 years, an orderly on cradle ward. The outpost we built into the hull of an old survey ship, parked in permanent orbit around a dying star we only ever called the Ember. Most of my patients came to us already accounted for. The court called it transition care. I called it what it was. A place where the Corvain Dominion sent its bonded heirs to wait out the last months of a star's collapse. Because tradition said, a royal's vitality was tied to the star she'd been bonded to at birth, and tradition did not believe in miracles. Naira Vel Corvain arrived on a supply run in early winter, though we had no real winter out there. Just the ship's cycling lights dimming a shade to mark the hour. She was 26. Her escort logged her as crown-bonded heir. Corvain Dominion, terminal bond decline, expected 12 to 18 months. Nobody on that shuttle looked at her when they said it. They looked at their tablets. I looked at her because that was the job, and because 30 years of moving people from stretchers to beds teaches you that the ones nobody looks at are the ones who need it most. She had copper-bronze skin gone pale at the collarbone where the bond mark had started to fade. Deep indigo hair kept braided tight so it wouldn't need managing, and amber gold eyes that watched the ceiling vents like she was counting them. I introduced myself. She didn't answer for 3 days. On the 4th, she asked me, flat, testing, whether I understood what happened to a bonded heir once her star finished dying. I told her I understood what the file said. She said that wasn't what she'd asked. So I told her the truth, that the court would quietly hand her seat to her cousin, log her transition as expected, and that the paperwork for it was probably already drafted, because that was how doctrine worked. It didn't wait on people. It waited on stars. She looked at me a long time after that. Nobody had said it to her plainly before. I didn't fix anything for her. I couldn't. What I did was smaller than that, and I did it every evening for 4 months. At dusk cycle, when the ember hung reddest in the observation window, I wheeled her chair, or later, when she could walk some days, walked beside her, to the one window on the ward with a clear line to the star, because it was the only one low enough that she didn't have to crane her neck to see it, and craning hurt her by then. I never asked if she wanted to watch it. I just made sure the chair was there before she needed it. Some nights she talked. Most nights she didn't. I stayed either way, because a job that only shows up when someone's talking isn't the job I signed up for. The court physician who oversaw her file was a precise man named Advisor Threlkin, and he ran the ward the way you'd run an actuarial table. Kindly, but at a distance. The way you're kind to a number you already know the ending of. He didn't dislike Naira. He simply didn't believe there was anything left to do for her but keep her comfortable until the doctrine resolved itself. I want to be honest about those 4 months, because they weren't tender in the way the court's later paperwork made them sound. Some evenings she was sharp with me, testing whether I'd flinch or stop coming. I didn't, because 30 years in this line of work teaches you the sharpness is usually the last thing a person still controls, and taking it personally is a kind of theft. Other evenings she told me about the Corvain court, in careful, clipped sentences. The cousin already redecorating the receiving hall in his own colors. The advisors who'd stopped addressing her directly. The particular cruelty of being spoken about. In the third person. In rooms she was still sitting in. I didn't have anything useful to say to most of that. I just kept the chair by the window, and kept showing up. The routine compatibility scan wasn't meant to mean anything. Every staff member on Cradle Ward got screened twice a year for donor eligibility, in case a bonded patient needed plasma or tissue support during a bad stretch. I'd had 6 of them over the years. All 6 came back the way a human should. No resonance, no signature, nothing that mattered to a bond reading. The 7th one, run 3 weeks after Naira started sitting up on her own more, came back different. Threlkin ran it again himself, standing over the tech's shoulder, because the first result looked like instrument drift, a resonance signature in my blood work keyed, faintly but unmistakably, to Naira's bond frequency. Not a full bond, nothing the old texts had language for. Just a low, steady echo, like something answering a call it was never built to hear. He ran it a 3rd time on a different unit entirely, same reading. He came to find me in the corridor outside her room, tablet in hand, looking like a man whose math had just stopped agreeing with itself. He asked me, carefully, how much time I'd spent in close physical proximity to the patient over the last 4 months. I told him the truth, evenings mostly, and the chair by the window. He asked if I understood what the reading meant. I told him I didn't. And I wasn't lying. What it meant, he explained slowly, checking a 2nd and 3rd source before he'd say it aloud, was that Naira's bond signature, the thing doctrine measured to decide when a star's collapse would take its heir with it, had been logging small, repeated stabilizations for weeks. timed to a pattern the instruments hadn't been built to flag because the pattern wasn't astronomical. It was mine, every evening at the window, every reading a fraction steadier than the one before it. He didn't call it a miracle. He was too precise a man for that word. He called it an anomalous resonance event requiring immediate reclassification of the patient's terminal status, and he filed it that way, in language flat enough to survive a court review, because he understood, better than I did in that moment, that doctrine only ever bent to its own instruments, never to a story. I went to tell Naira myself, before the court's transition officer could reach her first with whatever careful language they'd have chosen. She was at the window already, chair angled toward the ember, the way I always left it. I sat down across from her the way I had 100 evenings before, and told her what the scan had found, plainly, the way I'd told her the truth the first week she'd asked for it. She was quiet a long moment. Then she asked why I'd never told her the chair mattered to me too. I said it hadn't been about mattering. It had been about her not having to ask for something that small every night. She said that was exactly why it mattered. The court sent a formal notice 11 days later, reversing her transition status pending further study, and a second, quieter notice, granting her indefinite medical leave from Corvain succession duties, not a resignation, not a coronation, just permission to stay somewhere her vitals held steady. She used it to stay at Cradle Ward. I never asked her to. She told Threlkin she was choosing it, on the record, in case anyone above him wanted to argue with a woman who'd survived her own file. That evening she moved the chair to the window herself, before I'd finished my rounds, and had it waiting for me instead. When I sat down, she didn't look at the ember. She looked at me and said the real reason her star hadn't finished dying was never a mystery to her, only to the men reading the instruments. I told her I hadn't done anything a decent man wouldn't have done for anyone in that bed. She said that was exactly the part the doctrine had never accounted for, and reached over and turned my hand palm up on the armrest between us, like she meant to keep it there a while. I let her. We stayed at Cradle Ward another year before the court finally stopped sending notices, and longer than that after. The ember never did stabilize. Stars that far gone don't reverse course, whatever a resonance reading says about the person watching them. But Naira did. Threlkin's report called it an open case, pending long-term observation, because he never did find better language for it. Her cousin kept the receiving hall in his own colors, and neither of us ever asked for it back. I didn't need better language for any of it. I had a chair by a window, and a woman who moved it there herself now, most evenings, before I even asked. I've thought about it since, the part that still catches at odd hours, that the instruments only confirmed what the chair already knew. Threlkin needed 3 scans on 2 machines before he'd say it aloud. I hadn't needed any of it. I'd known for months, the plain way you know a small thing is working, long before anyone handed either of us proof. Some nights she still watches the star die a little more. I've stopped thinking of that as the whole story. The whole story is that I sat down next to someone the file had already written off, and kept sitting down, long after anyone was checking whether I still did. The instruments caught up eventually. She never needed them to.